I'd like to acknowledge that I meet on the land of the Wurundjeri people, the people of the Kulin Nation, and I want to pay my respects to their elders and the traditional owners of the land, and to recognise that these lands were never ceded and that we walk with privilege on their lands. I'm working in the response pillar, and the particular focus that I have within that is looking at frontline practice, and within the frontline practice looking at the issues in relation to the intersection between alcohol and other drugs with domestic and family violence. So we've got 3 parts to it. The first part is establishing a strategic policy group which looks at, across the nation of Australia, at the different practices in this space and how we can make policy reform in this space to be able to then develop the practice. We also have an arm of the research in Samoa and work with the National University of Samoa, and they're undertaking their own work in this area, focused on particularly looking at traditional values, particularly traditional spiritual values, but at the intersection of domestic and family violence and often with substance use. The third area of practice and focus is really the PhD student, and she's just beginning to establish her program of work, which is looking at the service system response to particularly Samoan women and children where there's domestic violence in a particular area of regional Victoria, and there'll be some focus again on the issues of alcohol and other drugs. The first year turned into a big surprise. We thought that we were going to just be doing a few consultations with key people in the space and then developing it and using that as the basis of a survey of the frontline workforce. But actually the first stage of the work turns out to be a mapping of what is happening in this space across Australia, because it's changed significantly over the last 3 years. And so mapping that, we felt, would be part of a reciprocity in working with the sector and with all the peak bodies and key organisations in this space. So our next stage after this will be, well, okay, we've got 5 or 6 different proposals to put to you that have arisen out of these consultations, and we'll be making decisions in the next couple of months with all our research partners to decide where we're going to go next. This has been a really important way of configuring and contextualising the work, to have the 3 eyes. So we've had a particular focus on the Indo-Pacific with our work in Samoa, with Professor Louise Matai and her colleague Fetamona. And so that's been a really exciting part of the work. And Louise is also on the supervisory panel for our PhD student, Casey Kale. And we have also another Samoan worker who's based in Victoria and who's also part of that panel. I'm working closely with Professor Heather Douglas, and she is clearly a professor of law, and so we work the node together along with Sarah Wendt, but also pulling in other workers from criminology in Griffith University. So that's exciting work as well. In our first round of discussions with experts in the area, consulted with several Indigenous organisations about the work that's happening in the front line. But we're also working with the traditional values, the Indigenous values in Samoa. I've been involved in the area of violence against women for many, many years. I've been particularly concerned that there are certain areas where we've had a very slow response. I mean, one of those areas is around children and domestic violence, and I guess I've tried to work for a long time in that space, but then really interested in how we deal with complexity where you've got domestic and family violence. And I think that I wanted to provide some leadership in this space to try and create a stronger voice so that we could do something better in an area where we've got significant and severe violence occurring. We've got 2 formal partners involved in our research, in fact maybe 3. So ANROS and also a Safe and Equal, which is the peak body in Victoria for the Domestic Violence, Women's and Children's Services, and NTV, No to Violence, working with the men. So those 3 partners are part of a group that we're establishing called the Strategic Policy Group, and that draws from peak bodies for AOD and for domestic and family violence from across Australia, and they'll help develop the agendas and also respond to the policy issues that emerge in this space and area, so that we can be proactive and nimble in relation to trying to shift the policy agendas that will, we believe, impact the frontline service response. What I'm really excited about is, and what's amazing actually, is being able to take 3 years of work that we did on an ARC linkage grant in the area of the intersection of domestic violence and substance use, and being able to take that forward for another 3 years with some further projects and a wider brief. So I think that that's just been amazing to have that luxury of being able to follow through on a program of work. We actually hadn't realised that there were so many things happening until we started talking to the different peak bodies and key providers in the space. That when we began the ARC linkage grant 3 years ago, there was very little happening in this space. So it's exciting to see 1,000 flowers blooming, but now bringing people together, mapping and showing people what's happening because they don't know what each other's doing, and then thinking about, well, how does that lead to the next stage of work. I guess in my particular area, I would want to be seeing a stronger relationship between Australia and the Indo-Pacific, and particularly with Samoa, so that we would want to be seen to be developing and supporting stronger relationships there. And I think that our contribution in this space could be important. I think that the collaborative space between domestic violence and substance use agencies has been extremely poor in the past. And so developing the work and creating the space where we can talk now about substance use coercion as part of the tactics of violence and abuse, rather than trying to get into ideological debates about what's the cause of domestic violence. This is not about that. This is about, at the front line, what we know is that when there's drugs and alcohol involved with in the context of domestic and family violence, that the impact, the severity and the frequency of domestic violence is compounded and significantly worse. So we're wanting a practice response in that space with the alcohol agencies, with the men's behaviour change area, with the caring dads area, which is where fathers use violence, and in the women's sector.